More and more of our meetings are virtual, and therefore we also have to consider that at times there are conflict in those meetings. Today we're going to explore how do you manage conflict in virtual teams. You know, conflict can be a poison, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. That is, if we can really handle it well. Stay tuned, we're going to explore how to manage conflict in remote teams, and you may be surprised by how I define conflict. It may not be what you're thinking. The first area I want to explore is the area actually of self and other awareness. But before I get in there, let me just say something about conflict in teams in general. You know, we have a language around conflict. And very often we can think of conflict as something that's awful, that's full of tension, that's dreadful, that rips people apart, etc. And conflict can be that, but I prefer to call that style of conflict unhealthy conflict. Conflict can also be something very healthy. You know, conflict around a debate of ideas, when you have two people passionately debating with each other about something they disagree with, that can be really helpful in the workplace because it can help people appreciate what are the different options here and what is the best decision to be made. So as we look at conflict, let's use those terms, healthy or unhealthy or destructive conflict. Now, where self-awareness comes in is this. Every person, I like to say, has a conflict story. We all grew up with conflict. Some of us have issues around conflict in that we really don't like conflict. The lesson we learned growing up was that conflict is bad and has to be avoided, and let's just not talk about it. Or else we could have grown up with this, well, let's just hit it, head on. Like, let's get it on the table. Let's approach conflict by absolutely rushing into it and almost with a glee around any form of conflict. Well, each of us have those stories, and those stories inform how we approach our own conflict. And so a good question to ask is, how aware am I of my conflict story? When I am thinking about conflict, does that make me feel dread? Is it something that I try to avoid? Or is it something that I might rush into when really what's required at the moment is to let things be and let people sort it out? Once we've kind of explored our own conflict story, then it's also important to look around us and to look at the other members of our teams. What's their story? How do they approach conflict? Because with that self-awareness, we know and we're informed that when conflict does arise, what's probably going to be my attitude and what's going to be the attitude of other people. And am I letting other voices be heard, especially those perhaps who would rather shut down and flee from the conflict, and those who would rather rush into it, and to keep that balance so that whenever conflict does arise, that everyone is engaged in that conflict. The second way is to really explore how are we dealing with our meetings and how is conflict dealt with in teams. One of the things that I'm observing with a lot of the different organizations that I'm working with is that conflict at times, because now we've gone into this virtual reality, is really not being brought up. That conflict rather is being diverted. That conflict sometimes is being suppressed. And so, therefore, it's a really important question to try and understand, are we allowing for natural conflict to come up in meetings? And the way we do this is by allowing the team to truly engage. You know, sometimes in a virtual setting, it's so easy to cut a meeting, to shut it down, and to say it's over or time is up. But it takes a really great leader to hang in there, to know when something is not settled, to know when things are not being said, and to let that meeting take its natural course and to enter into areas of conflict when needed. Because if we don't venture into those areas, then what happens is the conflict is never spoken about and all that energy comes out in different undertones. And so therefore, one of the areas that we can manage conflict on our virtual teams is to allow that conflict to actually arise, to allow those difficult topics to be discussed, to really allow time as well to highlight areas perhaps that because of this new virtual reality have become more difficult or perhaps are more prone to conflict. All of these need to be uncovered and brought to light, but they can only be brought to light when we give enough time and energy to truly working on them. You see, conflict does not have to be destructive. It can also be helpful. So as we end this video today, I'd love for you to make some comments below. How are you dealing with conflict in the virtual teams that you are part of? Have you found any wonderful ways of dealing with that conflict? Because I'd love to hear back from you. If you've enjoyed this video, I invite you to watch another video which explores how we can use emotional intelligence to handle stress in the workplace. Finally, I would love for you to subscribe to this YouTube channel. You can do that by clicking the button below. Ring the bell as well because it will remind you when new videos come out. I'm always producing content which explores different areas of leadership and a special focus on emotional intelligence.